Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our Intelligent Onboarding and Experience Summit. This is the 7th virtual summit by Intelligenists, so we should be pretty good at it by now. COVID-19 has brought a major shift in customer behaviour. Customers expect the same level of convenience now from their banks and financial institutions as they receive from Amazon and Facebook. That's put an increased amount of pressure on incumbent organisations to accelerate these digitisation strategies, not least being pressured by the kind of new fintech solutions coming out as well. Around 1 in 3 financial institutions have lost customers due to their inefficient or slow onboarding process, and 81% believe that poor data management lengthens that onboarding and negatively affects the customer experience. So we can see why it's really important to get that right. In order for organisations to thrive after the pandemic in this digital age, efficient customer onboarding is a key priority, and leveraging the right technology will really help determine long-term customer loyalty and retention, which banks really need to achieve to retain the trust and the loyalty that they've built up over the past few years. At this event, we'll be exploring the latest research, tools and services that are transforming digital onboarding practices and enhancing that customer experience. I just quickly want to give a shout out to our gold sponsor, iProve, which authenticates remote users online for onboarding and verification. So you can find out more about them after the event. And I also just want to say really big thank you to our media partners, Financial IT, FinTech Finance, Fintechna, Inside Telecom, Digital Scouting, FinTech Istanbul, Cryptopolitan, Dev Discourse, IAMTN and Crypto News Z. And I think that's just the amount of partners and people that are involved in this event really shows how important this issue is. I'll be asking the questions to our panelists and after their keynotes, but if you do have any questions, please send them in and we'll try to get through those as well. Delighted to be joined today by our speakers, Giuseppe, Manuela, Adam and Stephen. And I just want to kick off without further ado by introducing Gissuppe Codammo. He's head of onboarding, customer journey and KYC operations at BNL-BNP Paribas. He has over 20 years of experience in finance. He's a senior manager in charge of that end-to-end customer journey and focusing heavily on digitization. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Giuseppe.
Hello, everybody. My name is Giuseppe. As Olivia said, I'm in charge of onboarding and KYC operations for BNL. So I just share with you a presentation. 1 second. Okay, hope you can see it. Today will be mainly about sharing our experience and what we did and what we still have to do to get it right for the onboarding. And as Olivia was pointing out, it's really a matter to doing things right. Otherwise, you lose the capability to attract customers, and in the end of the day, you're gonna hinder your business and your competitivity. BNL is a bank, one of the major banks in Italy. We are part of the BNP Paribas group, and what is relevant here is that we cover. We are very much of a traditional bank with over 700 points of sale between branches, private banking centers, and so on. And but still, 60% of the customers are digital. So having the ambition to cover the whole territory, to serve all customer segments, from individuals to private, to small business, to large corporates, for example, and mixing and blending digital and physical channels is very much of a challenge when it comes to onboarding, because you need to keep together many different customer journeys and many different processes. Here is a representation of a synthetic representation, in fact, of the onboarding channels, onboarding options that we give our customers based on the segments and on the kind of onboarding. You see on the right, we have on the left, we have in branch traditional onboarding, so the physical meeting with the customer, which covers all customers except for the direct banking customers, which are those that are native, digital native. And then we have different digital options. One is the self-onboarding through web, which is mainly devoted to individuals. The same goes for the mobile through app digital onboarding. Then we have an online assisted onboarding, which means that it's a remote onboarding if the customer wants it. It's mainly devoted to small business and corporates, but it's not self. It's assisted because we realize that these customers they seldom want to do a completely self process. They want to be assisted. They want to be helped in uploading documents, in filling the forms, and so on. So we found that this was the most effective way to serve them. Then, together with the self-onboarding through web or especially app, we are developing new channels of onboarding in open banking, so through partners. So leveraging on what we did already through the mobile onboarding, we were able, and we hope we will be more and more able to attract partners and operate as open banking platform. And finally, on the right is not onboarding, is a KYC recertification channel, but we experimented last year and we rolled out, in fact, last year, an RPA, so a robotic application of on the KYC recertification. So we offer to the low risk, simplest customers the option to do the KYC renewal through a robot. So with a lot of savings both on the bank side, but also relieving the customer from part of the burden. So overall, the strategy is to give all customers one or more digital alternatives and to define the appropriate solution depending on the segments of customers. And in doing that, we realized that whichever channel you choose or whichever segment you serve, the onboarding is very much a moment of truth. I mean, of course, compliance is a main point when you talk about onboarding. So adhering to the rules, doing the KYC and so on. And of course, trying to be compliant and applying all the possible rules is one main point when you design the onboarding. But still, you cannot forget, of course, the cost. And because having 30 plus different customer journeys is going to have you're going to pay for it, because the more customer journeys, the more it's difficult to maintain them. And of course, you cannot forget the customer. It's all too easy to forget the customer, but it's absolutely vital not to forget it. So we call that the 3 C's: C for compliance, C for cost, C for customer equation. And they tend to be competing. If you want to be compliant, it's difficult to take into account the customer needs or to minimize the cost. And if you want to take care of the customer, maybe you need to stretch a little bit the rules compliance side. But it's also true that it doesn't need to be so necessarily. They can be competing, they tend to be competing, but they can also interact in a positive way for the bank. You can build a competitive advantage leveraging on these 3 and finding ways to keep them together. I will give you some examples later. And then, as I said, while you take care of rules, compliance, processes, IT, and cost, it's all too easy to lose sight of the customer. And here I represented, based on the experience, some do's and some don'ts. Very quickly, the U, it's convenient to focus on the standard customers and to exclude maybe the complex ones, like politically exposed persons, high-risk nationalities. There are many examples. But although this is maybe cost effective and simplified onboarding process, in my experience, this conveys a powerful message on the fact that you don't want to deal with customers when they have some complexities, and it's a negative message. So first thing is do not leave any customer behind, even when it's complicated to manage some customers. Then there is the when. The when to me is one of the most important, because I think we underestimate the importance of leveraging on asynchronous interactions. Asynchronous interactions means that you don't need to have the customers in front of you when you do all the processes and all the stuff that you need for the onboarding, including the KYC. Being asynchronous is quite a given for digital processes and channels. Not always necessarily, but tends to be so. It's not the same for physical channels. Physical channels normally are associated to physical meetings with customers, to synchronous interactions. But there are ways you can redesign the processes to minimize this. And why do you want to do that? You want to do that because the customer prefers to do things when they want, even if they opt for a physical channel. And whichever, and you want your meeting with the customer to be meaningful, to be about the customer needs, to be about business opportunities. You don't want it to be about the paperwork, about the IT tools that maybe they just freeze at the very wrong moment, and so on. That's why you should push very much for having as many as possible asynchronous interactions with the customers, unless customers want something else. The where, we will see later, the where is mainly about which channels do you want to use. Of course, today we are focusing very much on digital channels, but we shouldn't underestimate the importance of physical channels. Maybe because I'm working for a traditional bank, customers to some extent, they expect to have a physical option. And normally when you start thinking about that, you go on a multi-channel segment, meaning you give customers options, but these options tend to be separate, and it's difficult for the customer to start on a channel and maybe continue on the other. But it tends to be very much infuriating for a customer to begin an onboarding online, for example, and then go to a branch because for any reason, and discover that the relationship manager is not able to retrieve the information or the documents that you uploaded already. So you need to move. It's vital to move from a multi-channel to an omni-channel setting, where omni-channel means that you can blend, you can truly blend the channels, and you can allow the customer the freedom to move between one channel and another. And then we go to the how, and the how is about mainly the level of assistance you want to provide. As we said before, we have self-onboarding for individuals, while we decided to have assisted online onboarding for corporates and the like. The level of assistance, it's important, especially when you talk about the digital onboarding, because you tend to think that the customers can do things alone, which is not the case most of the time. So whether it is a service center behind the back, or a chatbot, or as a last resort, telling the customer to get in touch with the relationship manager in branch. Anyway, you need to plan carefully which kind of assistance you want to offer. Of course, it must be related to the profitability of this customer, and then to stick to the plan. We were talking about omni-channel. I give you quickly a few examples. Here is how we went from a branch physical onboarding to an omni-channel onboarding. First step, of course, is to have a truly digital and paperless onboarding in branch, meaning that you need to have capabilities like digital signature, digital archiving, and so on. But also you need to have a process which is as much STP as possible. meaning that you need to bypass the back office. And our aim is to bypass the back office at least 75% of files. We cannot bypass the back office for high risk files, for example, but for any other file, the aim is that. And you do that how? Well, you do it by automating all the controls and checks. So we managed to automate FATCA controls. We managed to automate the residence address by calling external and public databases. We automated the ID check through the simple usage of an OCR capability, and to automate the check on PEP, sanction, terrorism lists, or adverse information lists. So all of this enables you to open the bank account in one go. And this is the main goal when you talk about the onboarding in branch. Then to go from there to an omnichannel, you need to take care, in my experience, of two main issues. One are the issues related to privacy and GDPR, because it's all too easy to ask the customer to start an onboarding online, to fill all the data, and to make this information available to all relationship managers, so that the customer can go in whichever branch he wants, whenever he wants, and complete the onboarding. But here we have some issues, because of course, we cannot make maybe also critical information about the customers available to all employees of the bank. So you need to put some limits to that. And this hinders, of course, the possibility to be completely omnichannel. And then the other point is the customer identification. We tend to assume and to rely and to associate the identification meaning, the identification means with the onboarding channel, meaning that if a customer was onboarding in branch, we do assume that the relationship manager doing the onboarding identified the customer. All the same, if a customer was onboarding online, we assume that the customer opted for the one or two options that he could have, either biometric identification, bank transfer, for the onboarding. But then when you have an omnichannel setting, so you don't know exactly which customer, how he was identified and when, then you need to be more, let's say, strict and structured in defining where the identification is and was, and to be able to have an audit trail about that. Otherwise, you will not be able to prove that the client was properly identified. And this is a major point, not only for compliance reasons, but also for fraud risks and so on. Here we have an example on what we did for the legal entities. So for corporates and small business SMEs, in terms of omni-channel onboarding, we have a fully digital and paperless process. We won't go through, we don't have time, all the things, but suffice to say that all the red squares are related to steps in the process, in the traditional process, that we could remove thanks to this digital approach. And the result was that the NPS, so the score expressing the satisfaction of the customer for the process, which goes from 0 to 100, went from plus 14 to plus 63. In fact, it doesn't go from 0, but it can be negative as well. So it was a very, very positive result. Again, here you have an example on how you can have the 3 C's going together. Automating the data entry by collecting information from public sources, of course, is reducing the cost, but also improving the customer experience, because we reduce the amount of information we ask the customer, and we reduce the time. But also it's beneficial for compliance, because the more data and the more controls you trigger automatically, the more likely you are to complete a KYC file without skipping any of these points, and so having a file that is more likely to be compliant with all the internal regulations. So in this case, we have an example of those 3 C can actually reinforce each other. Finally, the last example on how to go omnichannel, I gave you repeatedly the example of the customer going online and then changing his mind and going to a branch. we are actually experimenting something which is on the opposite side. And we're experimenting this for private customers, which have different needs. So we start from the customer needs, and we designed a process and a journey where first there is a meeting between the customer and the bank, and because the customer expects to be met by someone to some extent. But then we give the customer the option, instead of producing all the paperwork, having several appointments with a private banker only for bureaucratic reasons, to opt for a digital onboarding in-app. In that case, the customer starts some very light parts of the process, but then there is a middle office taking care of all the data entry and all the KYC requirements, so that the customer, the moment he can access the digital channels, will find his KYC already completed by someone in the bank, just ready to sign. So he will check the KYC, he will sign it, and he will completely, in a very much effortless way, the onboarding. And this answers to two needs peculiar of these customers, of private banking customers. One is the need to be recognized, so to have the perception of receiving an elite service, so not to be treated as any other. And the second reason is not to be encumbered, because this customer, being normally high net worth, we are obliged to ask maybe many more questions to them. So having the KYC and the onboarding process very much burdensome, more so than common individuals. And so the only way to enable a digital onboarding for this customer was to work for them. And so this way we can ask as many questions we want. They don't have to feel anything, and still they will not feel that we asked too much. And so that's why we decided to go this route. We will release this onboarding process end of the year, so it's not still live, but we are doing all the implementations needed to make it available to our customers. Olivia, I don't know if I went too fast, too slow, but that's it, in fact.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And I think particularly great to see the kind of care that BNL has given its different types of customer. The question I had was around the kind of categories of customers you have and that mix of technology and the human touch that they require. How do you kind of keep getting that feedback and understanding what a different customer's need is from the onboarding process?
Well, the main first feedback is complaints. When they do complain, you know you're doing something wrong. But apart from that, the more structured feedback is through an NPS. So we are doing an NPS surveys all the time. For example, for corporates, but also for individuals, we do the NPS survey just a few days after the onboarding. So to make sure that they remember the experience and they give us the feedbacks. So this is the main point. And any kind of implementation and investment is done listening to the customers. So designing together with the customer the solution.
Certainly. And are there any kind of common mistakes that you see happen, whether in your experience or you see other banks, when it comes to keeping the customer at the center of everything?
Yes, the most common mistake is not keeping the customer at the center. I mean, sometimes when you launch an IT project, you tend to focus on the IT constraints, on the budget constraints, on compliance constraints, and you can very easily forget the customer. So start doing not what is the best option, but what it's the most viable or maybe the quickest option, which is never good.
And I suppose it's been a long process to get to where you are now. Is there anything you'd wish you'd known at the start?
I don't know. It's very much been a journey. I've been working on this area for 3 years now, and I already found a few things done. So it's quite a longer. And I think in hindsight, you can say so, but actually you very much learn by experience, by making mistakes. So I assume that we couldn't avoid many of these mistakes.
Sure. Okay, well, those are all the questions that I have. Thank you so much, Giuseppe, for that. I think
Thank you.
really interesting to get that experience from such a large organisation going through this change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.